All right, guys, welcome back to another podcast episode. I've got one I'm really excited for today. I've got Matt, who is the founder and director of Rimpact. They recently released their chain damper, which I have right here. Lucky enough to get a few rides on it. So today I'm looking forward to chatting about the chain damper as well as some of the other really cool stuff that Rimpact has going on. So thanks for hopping on, Matt.
No problem at all. Really excited to talk more about this product.
Yeah, dude, totally. And I guess before we get into the chain damper, maybe just a brief background. You said you're the founder of Rimpact, so how did Rimpact come to be, and your involvement with it?
So I started making tire inserts back in 2018. Back then, that was like that was all the rage. Everyone wanted to run tire inserts suddenly, and so did I. So I looked at what was available on the market, and I kind of wasn't happy with the options. They were either too pricey or they didn't perform in the way I wanted them to benefit my riding. So I went and made some for myself. Then my pals wanted those as well, so I made some for them. And then before I knew it, they were getting shared around online, and I was getting like people sliding into my DMs asking to buy these things from me. And like just started a company based off of that. And 6 years later, we're now moving on to bigger and better things, hopefully. So we make tire inserts. We've just launched a chain damper, which is our first like metal product, I suppose. And oh, sorry, actually, we actually released a bike stand a little while ago, which is kind of like a car park, super easy to use, like quick actuation, packable bike stand. Um, and now we've released a chain damper, and then hopefully in the future we'll release our chain mass damper. So all products that are kind of based around filling a need for me so I can enjoy mountain biking more, and then I sell them to other people because that helps.
Yeah, nice. Kind of sounded like it all started by accident. Pretty organic way to grow a company.
Kind
That's
of,
pretty
yeah,
cool.
absolutely.
And yeah, they all seem these products seem to be oriented around kind of vibration feedback. So it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on kind of how each of those products does that. But I guess we can start with the chain damper. I mean, where did the initial idea come
Mm-hmm.
from? And I think what's unique about this is it's kind of zeroing in on a different feedback. Like the talk's been all about pedal kickback. So how did you guys kind of zero in on like the chain?
Yeah, so the long answer would be that back in the 2019, 2020, I was building up a new bike, and the way I kind of go about kind of choosing my next rig that I'm going to ride on and test stuff on tends to have like a theme to it. And the theme of that bike was how how much performance can I squeeze out of a particular bike, rather than it being like, can I make the best overall bike? It's more, can I take something and then squeeze out way more than the sum of its parts, so to speak. Um, so all the way back then, the O chain was a product that was new to the market and gaining some traction, and lots of people talking about it. A few pro riders were starting to pick it up, and it was something that really intrigued me. They were making a lot of claims about pedal kickback being a very like a thing that inhibited riders, and I had rarely ever felt issues with pedal kickback, but I did understand what they're saying and kind of wanted to understand it a bit better. So I went and purchased one and used it, and um, pretty much straight away I noticed like huge amounts of ride quality benefits and improvements. I was impressed with the product. Um, but the things that it was helping me with weren't the things that they were advertising and what they had designed initially. I felt very much like it was a the secondary function of the device was what everyone wanted to use it for and what I was getting benefits for, which was this idea that when you're reusing it, you have some elastomers inside the device that was helping mitigate a little bit of like like general feedback from the drivetrain as opposed to the pedal kickback function occurring and helping me. Um, and I could sort of really see this on the trail where if I went and did back to back testing, I couldn't really find any trails that I regularly rode that I could induce pedal kickback with a regular drivetrain. But when I rode with the O chain, I was finding that all the time it just felt a little bit smoother. Um, so over a few beers with the engineer that we worked on this project, we discussed the O chain. He had been riding one as well, and we kind of zeroed in on this idea that it was softening the drivetrain feeling in general, the drivetrain experience, so to speak. And that was what we liked about it and what everybody else liked about it. And we decided that if you were to actually design the device to do that secondary function as its primary thing, perhaps you could gain way more performance out of the product. We've all ridden chainless before and found that our bikes work so much better. Whether or not you subscribe to the suspension actually working better, it feels better, and you can kind of focus on what you're doing more. So we figured if we go down a rabbit hole of like trying to calculate where the forces are coming from, where the feedback that we'd feel from the drivetrains coming from, and then mitigate those forces, we might be able to make a better product, basically. So that was way back in sort of 2020, 21 by the time we got going on that project, and we probably put a lot of effort into it through 22 and 3. Through 23 and 24 to release it this year.
Yeah, it's awesome. And here it is. So, yeah, just based on what you're saying, I mean, I've ridden the O chain too, and I did a review on it, and that's something I touched on too, because this pedal kickback thing I feel like is so elusive. It happens in, different places kind of randomly. It's a hard thing to quantify, but like you're saying, there's a constant benefit, outside of these pedal kick instances that kind of translates to this overall ride feel. So, yeah, and exactly what you're saying, like that's not really talked about much, or it's not the primary use case for it. So when you guys started to go down this route, like what was the process for the testing and quantifying what that force was that you were trying to mitigate?
Cool. Yeah. So we had a few different ideas of what was causing the feelings that we kind of wanted to remove from the bike. And the first thing we did was sort of highlight that chains are quite heavy. On average, they weigh about 260 grams, and they're strung between your cassette and your chainring, but not in like a torqued manner. They're just loosely hung there, and then both the cassette and the chainring can rotate towards each other to add more links to that section of the chain, meaning that the system can flail as much as it wants up and down, forward and back, side to side, and add more length into that area. And given that it's got some mass to it, as the suspension compresses and decompresses, it will flail around. We all understand kind of chain flail, change to lap. And that feeling that we felt that we were feeling through the frame and through the cranks of the bike, we felt was more likely to be coming from that area than it was to be coming from moments where the chainring and the cassette stayed static and the suspension moved away, causing it to go taut, and that's what you were feeling. We kind of disagreed with pedal kickback being the primary cause of this puzzle. So we kind of did a bunch of calculations and came to the conclusion that drivetrain feedback is like a big puzzle and has lots of different pieces that make it up. But some pieces are really big and some pieces are really small. It's not a conventional puzzle where all the pieces are the same size. And from the various calculations we did and the analysis we did with like slow-mo, we found that, or we believe that the chain flail or chain energy part of the drivetrain feedback puzzle is like 90% of the puzzle. It's just one big slab you put in the puzzle first, and then you just add a few extra pieces around the outside to like nip it up. So we figured if we designed a product that did that 90%, it might by default solve some of those other little ones as well, which we believe it does. But as long as you solve that 90% thing, you're not really going to notice those small little bits at the bottom. So the I've said about the calculations that we did to find out how much energy the chain could have. Basically looked at enduro and downhill bikes on the market and calculated the shock shaft speed that they could achieve with a given spring rate at like a given wheel force, and find that if the axle would move at a certain speed, the chain would also move at a certain speed. We calculated that speed and the energy that it would have when displaced at that speed, and then reverse calculated that to work out how much energy we would need the chain ring to kind of resist or be able to take from the chain as the chain flailed. So you're effectively controlling or capturing the energy of that chain flail, which would result in hopefully a smoother ride. So we then took that those calculations and like put them into a design, and then played around with things like how much the chainring could rotate and how stiff the springs would need to be to match both the energy that the chain would have and also the amount of travel that chainring had to twist in. So the less that it moved, the more spring rate it would need. The more that it moved, the less spring rate it would need. But you also had like a certain package size you had to fit it in to make it fit certain size chain rings and also not to be too thick so it fit on boost and downhill bikes, etc. So it's a bit of a puzzle in itself to get to the end product. We went through quite a few different like iterations to work out what we needed. But what we've got now is a very much descent focused performance product that's focused on totally capturing all of the energy in the chain and controlling it throughout the chain rings kind of travel, so that by the time it's fully bottomed and returns to full travel again, the chain has had its energy like dissipated over time, as opposed to spikes. If you were to plot it on a graph, for example, on the screen, it's going to be from left to right. So instead of it spiking up and then kind of doing this as the chain dissipates through the bike, the energy of the chain, we want to see kind of a more smoothed out arc, basically. And that's what the chain damper does.
Nice. Yeah. And I think that's kind of the main question that's out there. And it was for me when it first popped up, is kind of like, what's that difference? Not just in the target marketing, but what's the difference in the actual product? And from writing it and hearing you talk, it seems like it's mainly due to the spring rate the chain is rotating against. Is that correct? Maybe you should just put it in your own words, like absolutely. How those two products differentiate.
Yeah, definitely. So you can approach solving the drivetrain puzzle from different directions. You got the pedal kickback kind of direction, where you calculate how much the pedal kickback phenomenon will cause a chain ring to rotate in worst possible instances, and then you give it enough travel just to rotate that amount. And that's kind of the direction O-Chain have come in at. And that certainly piqued our interest, but we found that if we came from the opposite direction and said, well, instead of it being pedal kickback that's causing it, perhaps drivetrain feedback's being caused by something else. And then we found that chain energy is really high during like a downhill race run, for example. So if you were to capture that chain energy and control it and smooth out over time, you wouldn't feel the effects of that chain energy. And so we reverse engineered those calculations to create a product that ultimately, I understand, looks pretty similar. But when you get one in hand and you have a look at it properly, and if you compare the two side by side, you'll see the springs are totally different. stiffness. It's about 16 times the stiffness of the ones in the no chain. The elastomers we use have like a different shape and a different design to them. The amount of rotation that it can achieve is completely different. And that's not to mention things such as like the sealing properties that we focused on to make it very like weatherproof. The fact that it's all like integrated in a single plane, so the chainring is sitting dead center to the chain line rather than it being a secondary part that you bolt onto a device that sits over here. So there's no weird kind of shape that the forces have to pass through as it goes through the product. Instead, it's all dead center. So yeah, and I could go on and on, but effectively we've definitely gone from two opposite ends and certainly not met in the middle, but we can see why to the layman it can look like a very similar product. And to those people, all I say is go ride one, and you'll shut up. Basically, you'll say something completely different once you've experienced the two back to back.
Yeah, definitely riding them. It's different. I haven't ridden them on the same bike on the same trail. I've ridden the chain damper on my Stumpy and was riding the O chain on my downhill bike, in very different conditions. But even just comparing that, it's different. And I have them both here, so I guess I'll just like demonstrate for the people like what you're saying with that. With the spring rate is like I can rotate the O chain through its entire travel, pretty much bottom it out, with my hand, and then the chain damper is like I can barely get it to move. Like you can just see it starting to get into its travel.
On that exactly on that exact point, you can barely get it to move. When we first received the machined out prototypes and stuck the springs in that we had calculated to be the correct springs, thought that something was wrong because with our like calculations or with the design, because we felt like it should be easier to rotate.
Yeah.
As soon as you bolt it to a crank, though, and you have any kind of leverage on there, you suddenly can rotate it quite easily, and you realize that it's just a case of these forces that are passing through a chain are so damn high that you need such a stiff system. So,
Yep.
so yeah, the for guys at home, you have this this mount plate that sits in the center, and the chainring sits directly on top of it. There, meaning that all the forces that pass through the center of the crank go straight up through the chainring, and there's no possibility of like creaking occurring as a result of passing forces through like 90-degree turns, basically.
Yeah, makes sense. I mean, just from a like finish and product standpoint, I mean, it looks solid, looks nice. it's a nicely good industrial design on it. It looks good on the bike. So I'll be doing a lot more riding with it. I've pretty much ridden it. I've ridden it 3 times now. One on a massive backcountry ride. I'll be doing a full review once I've got like the whole thing really sussed out. But initial impressions are that it definitely works, and I'm riding it like on that Stumpy 15. So I've got like on that big backcountry ride, I had it set up with like the can fully open, no spacers. So for a 145 mil bike, it's like incredibly supple. And then while running that, like it was kind of wild, like how it, like both those two things were like making, the ride experience like pretty, it's just the amount of feedback that was coming through the bike for that travel range on the stuff I was riding. It was pretty cool.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to your review and finding out kind of what you think. I'm sure you'll probably agree already that it has almost like a personality that it adds to the bike. It was very much designed as a like performance, like full gas product. So when you get on the bike and you ride it and you feel how smooth that it makes the bike, it makes you want to just charge harder. pedal a bit harder and like stay off the brakes as long as you possibly can, and really just like go. Um, and I kind of, yeah, I feel like the chain damper has a personality that's very very different to what the air chain does, which is kind of like lowering a bit of tire pressure or something. It's not like a subtle change. It's quite a big change to the way you'll approach riding your bike, hopefully. So yeah, that's the product.
Yeah, I'm waiting to do the like the back test. You know, I've gotten on the product, I feel it, and then yeah, the next step is to do the switch back to back in the same day, and really kind of get a feel for how it's affecting the bike. You know, moving on to the next hot topic. Like you said, very similar name, but the mass damper. So I've read your guys's. Oh, you got it right there. Sweet. So this is all the rage. Everyone's mass is needing to be dampened now if you're on the World Cup circuit. And it seems like you're maybe one of the only people that has actually have experience developing and tuning this. So I'm super excited to get your whole thoughts on the mass damper craze. So where did your interest in mass dampers come in? What kind of, similar to the chain damper, like what sparked the idea to dive into this stuff?
Yeah, so it started a similar time to the our like initial testing with the chain damper. So back in about 2020, we during the winter one year we were packing some inserts for a distributor order, and I watched a video on YouTube like the night before, and I brought out my colleague, and it was a video that was talking about how game changing mass dampers were when used in F1. I'm a big F1 fan, so even though I wasn't aware of these mass dampers being used at the time because I was too young back then to have followed it at that sort of granularity, um, finding out about them was like really intriguing to me. They basically painted this picture of a device that would allow cars to hit the apex of turns much more violently, and then it would return the car to like a more like back to equilibrium. It would like settle the suspension of the car quicker as a result of this mass and its function pulling the nose of the car back down to like static rather than having an oscillation in the front end. And given the aerodynamics are so important with F1, by bringing the like level of the nose of the car to where the engineers had designed it quicker, it was allowing the drivers to put more power down earlier, to corner a little bit tighter, to maintain traction on the front end a lot better. Um, the suspension on on these race cars are so stiff that they kind of they need like that help to not oscillate a little bit. They have obviously typical like fluid damper systems to them, but they're still clearly we're finding something along these lines, and a mass damper was being used to help specifically the Renault F1 car to like a huge effect. It allowed Alonso to win a bunch of races and win the World Championship that season, and the FIA promptly banned it the following season because it was affecting the aerodynamics of the car. That's a very debatable subject in the F1 world, but yeah, that's why they banned it. And so I brought this up to my colleague and said, it sounds really cool. I wonder if that kind of device would stabilize like the front triangle of a bike to the extent that you could just make a bike feel more composed. We've already been testing bikes with different amounts of like lead weights or steel weights or whatever placed in different parts of the down tube of a bike to stabilize it and to add a little bit more sprung to unsprung mass ratio. But what if that weight could be used also to a greater effect by having like a mechanical advantage to it, basically? So we discussed it kind of at length and decided that it would be really cool if you could just put some sort of like similar device in your head tube and just go for a ride and see if it like worked. And that kind of set off again this like rabbit hole of learning what they were, how they worked, doing a bunch of math to ensure that it was tuned correctly, trying out countless iterations of them to find out that some things worked really well and some things like made things far worse. And eventually we got to a point where we were consistently able to put it into someone's bike and they would go faster, and they would come down with smiles on their face saying that the feel of their bikes changed and they improved it, even when doing like blind A/B testing where they had no idea what we were putting in their bike, and putting like dummy weights inside the head tube that were an identical weight but had no like mechanical function to it. And after doing like over 100 runs with people, we're finding that they're always noticing the benefits and identifying the placebo versus the non-placebo one and going faster with the non-placebo one. So yeah, that's kind of where the project came from, and it's mostly just been a fun project for us, like a learning thing that over time became more and more exciting and pushed us towards eyeballing this as a real product to sell to the world. And then in about 2023, we saw some spy shots of Amory Piron riding in his like local French tracks during the off season, and he was testing something that was attached to the outside of his bike that looked very much like a mass damper, same sort of shape and size, the ones that we had been testing for like 2-3 years at this point and had shared around to certain people within the industry and showed them off. So I'm not saying that they stole it or anything because we didn't invent mass dampers, but we on that day decided we would tell the world that we'd been working on this and showed them the backstory and start kind of opening our doors to the development process of this rather than keeping it secret, because we didn't want to be pipped to the post, so to speak. We'd put in so much work into it and so much money into it by this point that I didn't want someone else to release something before I did and claim that they were the first ever to do it when we're already very deep down this rabbit hole. And fast forward another year or so, the chain damper's getting closer and closer to being like ready to launch, and we had to make a call which one we would like put the remainder of our efforts into to launch first, and then go back to the drawing board with the other one to continue developing it. And the chain damper was like closer to being fully complete and an amazing product, whereas this was very like rough around the edges, not particularly user friendly, and we still didn't fully have all the like the data like to back up the performance that we were feeling with it on the trail. So we parked that one sometime earlier this year, and we're now back working on it now that the chain damper's out.
Yeah, that's super cool. Yeah, especially I think that's what was interesting when I saw that pop up. It's like, oh, this is this new thing, but it's like you guys have clearly been working on this for a while and have a pretty decent understanding of what's going on here. And I think it seems like a device that, like you said, is only as useful as it is well tuned. So what was kind of the experience? I mean, from my understanding is like, if it's not tuned correctly, like if it's oscillating at the wrong frequency, like it could be worsening the ride experience, like doubling, like amplifying the forces on the bike. Is that what you guys are kind of finding in your testing?
Absolutely. So to just retrace the steps back a little bit to speak about like what the device is and how it works, is probably worthwhile before we say like why it could be negative as well as a positive. So effectively, I got like an earlier prototype model, so it's very rough around the edges here. Effectively, the mass that sits in the middle of two springs can move up or down on the central shaft by way of being like displaced by forces, basically. So if this is connected inside your head tube, like static, as your steer tube moves up rapidly, the inertia of this mass will compress the spring below, and then when your head tube moves down, this will come back up, basically. So you can tune this to match the frequencies that you have deemed negative, and make it so the spring stiffness, the combination of the spring stiffness, the mass, and the friction that is inherent in the system, like calculates out as a specific oscillation frequency, and that frequency will, if you match that to like the frequency that you want to like take out the system, it will effectively cancel it out, kind of like almost like noise cancelling headphones in a way, like in a very loosely linked sense. It's cancelling out negative feeling by moving around at that same sort of rate. And so you almost just don't feel that negative feeling anymore. So what we did was we tried to work out what the negative frequencies were that pass through a bike. And it turns out that's not a simple question. There's lots of them, and different people will claim one thing feels worse than another compared with someone else. And that's the beauty of mountain biking, right? So if you were to set up your bike in a very specific way and ride a very specific track at a very specific speed, it's very unlikely that someone else is going to go and ride that same track at exactly the same speed with the exact same setup and notice the exact same amount of vibration from a certain frequency as a negative feeling. It's just not going to overlap. So we recorded tons and tons of just ride data, like raw ride data, and we put it through a Fourier transformation, which basically just on a graph maps how frequently you saw a given frequency. So you get given a graph that basically like has, you saw 30 hertz loads, you saw 50 hertz a bit less but quite often, and you saw 120 hertz like even less, and you saw 600 hertz like really seldomly. And then we said, okay, well, do you actually want to get rid of this particular frequency, or is that intrinsic with how connected you are to riding a bike and how you feel grip and so on? So we recorded riders ride a section of trail, then asked them to like tell us very in-depth feedback about what they were feeling whilst they rode the trail, and then tried to like map the time data to the frequency data that we were recording, the displacement of the sensors that we put on the bikes, and tried to like identify like, this particular feeling that they felt in this spot here through that corner was this vibration frequency. And so if we were to try and remove that, they'd actually feel like it was better, whilst leaving maybe one of the higher frequencies or the more high amplitude frequencies back in the device, if that makes sense. Because with this very simple design, it's a single degree of freedom device, meaning that it can only really be dialed into one specific frequency at a time to work. And you might find there's some overlap with the frequencies there, but on the whole, you're limited to only targeting one thing at a time, unless you were to change the device up between like runs or something like that. So there were many iterations of the product that made things worse. You got on the bike and you tried to ride and just something fell off, whether that be like very noticeably like rattly inside the bike because something was miles out, or it would be just a subtle feeling that it didn't feel right, almost like you just needed to add a click of compression and 2 clicks of rebound to your fork. It's just something like that. But when we got closer and closer to it, it was like, oh, that's actually quite different. That's quite noticeable and very positive. And then once we kind of got to that point, we dialed in a little bit further and began placebo A/B testing to see if we were just not getting caught up with this whole idea of we've worked hard on something, we want it to work, and so it works. And instead, we enlisted a bunch of people that had no idea what it was or what we were trying to achieve, and just told them to come to somewhere where we could put them inside their head tubes without them knowing we were doing that, and just basically told them that like to go ride your bike, basically do the same lap over and over again. And then when you get down to the bottom, write a bunch of feedback down, and we'll look at the times without you knowing what's going on and see if we can see like a pattern emerge. And when we paused the testing to go and work on chain damper a bit more, we were up to about 120 laps completed within this kind of blind A/B testing system, and at that point, all but one run done with the real working device versus identically weighted device that was like mechanically locked out so it couldn't oscillate in any way, were done faster than the device, than the placebo device. So riders were, without realizing it, going quicker with it than they were without it. So it's certainly not statistically like relevant data. You couldn't submit a scientific paper to say this testing we did is like rigorous, but more it points towards an outcome that if you put this thing in your bike, it roughly makes you go a fair bit quicker. And the riders all reported that they enjoyed the feeling more with it in than with it out. And a lot of them have gone away and kept the prototype they had in that worked at choice, and have just continued to run it. So that's real positive to me.
Yeah, totally. Can you describe what the feeling is, or is it more of a lack of feeling? Like, is it taking input out of the trail?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. It's missing the feeling that you used to feel, that you didn't realize you didn't like until it was gone. You've turned down the volume on your car radio in order to reverse. Your brain suddenly has less like data to process and get rid of. It's like if you try and do, let's say, some difficult, like if you went to write a difficult email, or if you work in a field where you got to crunch some numbers, for example, if you try to do that whilst listening to death metal turned right up, is tricky, because your brain has to do an extra function, which is like cut that out and then think about this thing. And when we go and ride our bikes, we're riding at like quite high speeds. We're taking in so much like trail data and input data into our brains and processing them at a very, very quick speed in order to make good decisions. And if you can take some of that data away and just like lower the mental workload, it's more enjoyable to do the thing. And that's kind of what this device does. And same with the chain damper, in a way, it just lowers that cognitive load so that you can go and have more fun.
I think, yeah, that's awesome to hear. Like, that's something that that's like a tangent I've been on just with my bike reviews in general. And I think it's like a different thing than all out performance. It's like when it comes to geometry, suspension, everything is like it could work just as well. Like I could go just as fast on it on a single lap, but is it making me having to work mentally like 2 or 3 times as hard? Is it something I'm having to actively think about, manage, or can I just put it in the background and then I have this mental energy to think about line choice? I can focus on body position. I can keep my eyes up. And, I feel like when I'm overwhelmed, those things get kind of pushed to the side. So I think that's like yeah, it's not all just like grip, suspension, performance. It's like we have our brains to deal with when we're riding bikes, and like that's a huge part of it.
Absolutely. Like Bruni is human, but some people say he's superhuman. But when he rides a bike, he's got all the confidence in the world and all the talent in the world to do what he does best. And these sorts of things are, to like mortals, are just performance enhancers to like your confidence, to your talent. Like all they're doing really is allowing like your innate ability to come out a little bit more. When I'm confident, I ride my bike night and day different to when I'm feeling a little bit off that day because I'm a bit stressed or I'm a bit unconfident because something about the trail is like freaking me out. Like all these things that we are focusing on with all of our products. So even the tire inserts, they all just make things a little easier to achieve, and so we ride a bit better with them. And you could debate till the cows come home whether or not they make you actually faster in terms of um, is the rolling speed faster on a tire? It's very like measurable, quantitative stuff. Um, whereas these sorts of things are, if they make you feel a bit better, then you ride a bit better. And does that really matter after that? So yeah,
Totally. Um, and I guess one more question, just based on the actual tuning, like, if is it an either or sort of thing, where if it's good in this one area that you've measured and tuned for, is it bad in another area, or in those areas is it just not being activated in a way that it's doing anything?
it's not being activated in a way that it should be affecting much up to a certain point. So um, in testing, we find that when the spring rate is very very low, and you pair that with too heavy a mass, the device will like bottom out effectively when you're doing like quite intense, like high amplitude movements with the bike. Think slapping a front end down, or pulling up really hard, like violently to like clear a set, like a log or something on the trail. You would feel the mass contact the like the bottom out bumpers and cause like a negative feeling for the bike. But if it's not contacting and just oscillating freely, then those sorts of oscillations are, they're not a consistent, and b don't get in, like they don't interfere with anything in terms of how you are connected with the bike and how you feel the trail. They seem to just, if they happen to line up with like a particular frequency that you want to cut out, then you just don't notice that frequency not occur, and that seems to be beneficial. Um, but as I said, it's been a long learning process to get the product to work in the way it does for like a range of riders, and we've learned tons of different things along the way. But we still have like quite a way to go to fully understand like what we've managed to achieve through both testing and through like the design that we've come to before we understand it so well that when we like go to sell it, for example, we're like, yeah, this is exactly what it works, how it works, why it works, and we can almost we can hope for in the future to be able to calculate very specifically what rider would benefit from which spring rate, for example, you might pair with the device. For now, we're kind of eyeballing the product to launch with like a range of springs, maybe even a range of masses that you'd put in there as well. Um, and those would be like roughly kind of, we'd handhold the customer to be like, this is for this type of trail, this is for this type of rider, this is for this type of bike, etc. And you can customize it as you please and do some rides and see which one feels right and which one feels like wrong. And it's quite noticeable when you don't get it right. But yeah, the for now we're kind of still in this like prototype stage of trying lots of different things to see what works. And we've seen so many different teams in the race circuit like suddenly pop up with these devices. There's even been a brand that's come across from um, MotoGP into like the mountain bike space. I believe the owner of it just likes mountain bikes, so he's just decided to make a mountain bike version that has almost added sort of pedigree and proof to how these products can benefit the rider. When we first showed this off and started talking to people about it, there was a lot of like, this is snake oil, it can't possibly work. But now that, even though it's not our mass dampers, there have been mass dampers on the top step of podiums in the World Cup circuit. That's a lot that's gone away, and people are like, yeah, okay, they clearly work in some capacity. Like otherwise, these teams wouldn't use it because they're collecting so much data. Their suspension experts would very quickly be like, nah, hang on, that thing's making things worse. But instead, they're all continuing to run and they're all continuing to develop their own. And yeah, it's just highlighting that like these things can be tuned to a beneficial state. And we think we're already at that beneficial state, but we want to like polish it so that if the users at home bought one and put it on their bike, they're only going to get advantages, and there's not going to be the disadvantages that you might get if you just put like a package that someone else made for a different type of bike, different trail, different user, etc., into their bike. So yeah, that's sort of where we're at with it.
Cool. Yeah, it seems like you guys are really putting in the work to get the product. Yeah, there's a difference between like a prototype that works and something that's going to be good for everyone as a product. So it's cool that you guys are kind of putting in the work to make that happen. What do you make of the location of these dampers? Because on Dak's bike, it's on the rear triangle at the very back of the bike, which I find quite interesting. You guys is in the head tube, which I mean, from an uneducated perspective, seems kind of ideal. And then, the ones you're mentioning, I see like bolted onto like the fork crowns as well. So do you have any thoughts about the location of the damper?
Absolutely. So these mass dampers is like a broad term in the sense that you can change the design up and the particulars of that design to tackle different things. So you can focus on taking out things like trail buzz, for example, like the very high frequency but low amplitude forces that pass through the bike. And this like trail buzz would be, I guess, described as things that wouldn't physically move like your grips up and down to the point that you could visibly see it, but more you could feel it when you hold onto the bar, right? And then on the other end of the spectrum, you'd have mass dampers that would change the amplitude that the grip moves up at when you hit something very big. And those two differences can cause the design to be very different, and also where you'd attach it to on your bike to be different. So if you're attaching it to the main triangle, so our device, the CatShot's device, etc., you could kind of assume that you're either highlighting things like trail bars or you're highlighting things like amplitude of impact, right? Whereas the Mondraker one, for example, sits on the back end. That one's a little bit more tricky to pin down. I've never seen inside one. I haven't spoken to them to know what they're like aiming at, but I can only assume that they're looking at just the amplitude as opposed to the high frequency like buzz. It seems to me like what they're doing is they're adding more mass to the rear end, which means that the amount of force required to displace the wheel is higher, and then that would mean that the force of the shock would be lower when you hit something big, I think. So yeah, I think it's just a case of the designer has a design intent and like a goal in mind, and they've put it where it's most effective for that particular goal. There isn't necessarily an overlap between that goal and a different design goal. So if, let's say, Mondraker were to fit one to the front triangle of their bike, it would probably be tuned different and might even have a different design intent or like goal than it would when it's fixed at the end. You couldn't take that one off of the back end of the bike, put it on the front, and get the same result because it would inherently work differently because you have a sprung and an unsprung mass. So yeah, I think it's just a case of like what the engineers are trying to achieve with each one of those. But it's really cool that we've got different companies going for different like attacking it from two different angles, and I guess whichever one eventually comes out on top as like the more beneficial thing will be the thing we will move forward as an industry with. And I really hope it's something that goes inside your bike so you can't see it and it doesn't damage the like aesthetics of bikes. Users can just add it to their bike and it's like just a drop in and tighten up and go. You have to like have new rear ends machined to be able to fix it, or you have to have a dual crown bike in order to like attach it outside. It would be like integration is going to be the answer if they're going to work at all, right? So.
Well, cool. Yeah, super excited to see what you guys come up with, and like, yeah, just as a fan of the sport, yeah, interesting to see. Like, yeah, if next, I mean, it seems like the way it's going next year. I mean, everyone's going to be be on them. It seems like the new frontier, the hot craze, but it's cool to hear that there's actually
Yeah,
some data behind it.
we've certainly been approached by a number of race teams already and riders for next year regarding both the chain damper and the mass dampers. Like they all want to know what they're missing out on, I guess. They want to make sure that there's not like a cheat device that like top boys are using. So, and we're already working with like some of these teams that have their own version with our other products. So that's a little bit weird in that we're sending them one thing like inserts or chain dampers, and they've already got a mass damper, and we're like, well, we're not going to send you our one because you've already got something, and we're just kind of helping you out in that case. So. Yeah, I think next year we'll see a lot more of these things. But I don't know whether or not they'll stick and carry on, or whether they'll go away like a lot of other things in the industry. But what I can say is they're used in so many other industries, and they're like a staple in those industries that I could fully see it becoming a beneficial thing for everyone in the future.
Yeah, totally. Time will tell. Well, speaking about things that have kind of come in and stuck around, let's have a quick chat about tire inserts. So, yeah, I guess this is the product that Rimpact launched with. It's kind of the namesake. What's your take on tire inserts these days? Are they still as relevant as kind of we all got on board with when it kind of initially came a thing? Like, yeah, how's the tire insert market going for you guys?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a really interesting process to watch the industry go from being excited about these sorts of things to almost like pushing back initially because they became too popular. And it seems like society has this way of like always deciding that the most popular thing is actually inherently bad in some way. Taylor Swift gets very popular, and so some people like just decide that she's actually like a government spy. But what we've seen with the inserts is like baseless rumors get made up about the things, and then like a little bit of like negative press around them, and then ultimately everyone's kind of just like homogenized to this position now where there's like one camp of people that can't do without them, and then another camp of people that can take and relieve them. And the camp that can't do without them seem to be growing in number constantly. And we've gotten to the point where we are sending out hundreds upon hundreds of them to like the World Cup racers for every race, and they're in like tons of people's bikes, and they all use them and they all love them. And then there's a few people that hate them for no real reason that we can kind of work out. There's certainly some trade-offs like with every product. Like a downhill bike doesn't pedal very well, but it's not supposed to pedal like an XC bike. An insert weighs something, you're adding it to your wheels, but we understand that. We know that there's like a trade-off in that, like your wheels 100 grams heavier, but there's not really any like ride quality negatives that we're applying to the system, so we only kind of see it as like a positive thing. So yeah, over the like 6 years we've been doing this, we've gone from strength to strength really with and the initial excitement, the like maturity of like the product type, and we've throughout that continuously like tested and changed designs up and stuff, and realized that what we did initially was actually really spot on, and we just needed to refine it a little bit. And then to this day, we're now on a product that is definitely very different if you hold the two side by side to what we were doing in 2018, but it's like quite similar in look, I guess. And that's because it works so damn well. Like we just get reports all the time, like feedback from customers that they just haven't had a puncture in 3 years. And that is something that, going back to pre-tire inserts being a thing, and even like after the tubeless tire thing got a bit better, because there was a period where tubeless tires were terrible, you're still puncturing a lot. You're tearing tires, you're damaging rims, etc. And now that inserts are available for those people that suffered from that a lot, that problem seems to have kind of mostly gone away. And we're no longer, if you've noticed, talking about rim width or tire like technology all that much. And we think it's just because the people that had issues with that sort of stuff just swapped over to tire inserts, and it solved a lot of those problems. The inherent traits of tubeless tires and tubeless rims were sort of solved by this like middle product. So yeah, we're going strong with those. Basically, we've got like a race edition that's come to the market this year, and we're going to continue fleshing out that over the winter and next year. It's effectively like a lower profile version of our Pro insert, and we developed that in conjunction with some of the race teams like Commissar Muckhoff and Mondraker and YT, who gave us feedback that they were looking for a little bit more of a minimalist tire insert product that didn't provide quite as much of the damping or the support characteristics that we were kind of known for as a brand, and instead it was a little bit more focused on being like a run flat in the worst case scenarios, reducing sort of puncture chance by a bunch, but not the full amount. So we kind of designed a product that has sort of 90% of all those capabilities, but comes in at a much like lower weight and also less change to the ride feel that people are used to if they're just used to tubeless tires. So yeah, we're real happy with that, and that seems to be the thing that everyone wants to run nowadays.
Yeah, what teams are running Rimpact? I mean, you just listed off a few of them, but
yeah, so this season just gone, just finished. We've supported YT, Enduro, and the downhill team. We've sent inserts to the Mondraker downhill team have received inserts, and the Commissar Muckhoff team have been running their inserts for I think 2 or 3 seasons now, a little bit on and off. But then this year, like, we're fully on our inserts. And then we've kind of sent lots of inserts to various different riders throughout the roster, back right up to kind of the guys that don't qualify, on the basis that we'd send them direct to their mechanic or whatever, and we don't receive any kind of kickbacks. We're not part of like their team name or anything like that. We just send it to them because we like having our product being used on the World Cup circuit. We like helping out the guys and making sure that they're getting like good race runs in. So yeah, like I said, we shipped quite a lot this year. It was quite costly, but yeah, it's cool to get all the feedback that we do get from those guys. Ships onto the Canyon team as well. Yeah, there's a bunch more off the top of my head that I can't think on the spot, but yeah, it's been cool to hook all those guys out with stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe you can help me out with my own tire insert journey. I've pretty much tried Cushcore back when I was racing, and I mean, maybe this is a good opportunity for you to kind of talk about what makes your tire inserts your own. But for me, it was like I understood the benefits, but the trade-offs were just, I think, a little too strong. Given the full insert, I think it was like around 150 grams of tire. The tire change process, doing it on my own, was very, very, involved. And then I still felt like I would sometimes dent my rim with it, and then my bike just became like so heavy that I kind of transitioned to finding rims with a thicker rim bead, so I wasn't as concerned about pinch flats, and then just running downhill tires. So I guess for someone like me, like what am I leaving on the table by not running an insert? What's the performance?
Cool. So we spoke about like O-chain having a thing, and then we have approached things differently. When I started, Kushco was already on the market, and there was a few other brands that kind of just recently come to market, and I very much didn't think that the way they had skinned that cat, for lack of a better term, was the way I felt it should be skinned. Like I said, there was the Kush cores were at 250 grams a piece back then. I think they still are actually. Um, there was like Vittoria on the market, and they were very like voluminous inserts. So getting them in was really difficult. It also changed the way the tires like connected with the ground. The tread cap didn't like compress through like air. Instead, it was being resisted, and so you pinged off of line quite a lot, and you didn't track as you wanted. Um, and yeah, I could list like reasons why I wasn't happy with the stuff that was on the market at the time for days. But what it led me to do was try and design something that didn't have all of these trade-offs, because we trade-offs are like a thing that's inevitable, but you can like move the sliders back and forth for each of the traits, and then you get a design that comes out of that. So in terms of weight, I was convinced that you could use a different material than the one that was just being used across all these different brands, and that was either an EVA material that they were using, or they were using like a PU or a PE material, which they're using because they could like extrude out of a die effectively, and stick them together that way. Um, but the it meant that basically, in order to get the impact qualities out of that material, the resistance qualities, the density of that material had to be very, very high. And it kind of just seemed to me like surely there's just a better material available. So I went down the rabbit hole of like talking to a bunch of different plastics and foams manufacturers, and tried to find different materials that had design goals that were impact absorption or vibration absorption, and then doing my own very kind of, at the time, ghetto tests where I was just dropping like breeze blocks onto soft bits of wood, with the materials on the floor, to try and gauge which ones clearly had the best impact protection. Because this was when I hadn't started a business and I didn't have any money against like this idea. It was just, could I make myself something? And I came across one product that just in hand felt night and day different, and felt like it could probably be quite a good product. So I got a bunch of that, and I cut it into material, into the shape that I felt would be like best, and it turned out like crap. So I went back to drawing board, and like looked at why it was seemed good, and identified a few other little factors. Went back to the manufacturer of this foam. They actually suggested something else that ended up being the thing that we still use today, because it had a really good weight to impact, like resistance, like ratio. So our inserts, for example, our Pro insert can either go toe to toe or even outmatch like the best other impact resistant inserts on the market. So like Kush cores and Vittoria, for example, in impact like drop test jigs. So we've got our own one here, but there has been like tests done by like Pink Bike and done by like Hunt Wheels, for example, where they effectively just push a tire insert to destruction to see at what point the failure starts to cause rim failure or tire failure. And this material, being well over 100 grams lighter in the same wheel size, is able to withstand the same amount of force. So I basically designed something that used that material instead. So you're talking about adding loads of extra weight. We're talking 120 to 150 grams, depending on the model you put in your wheels, added to your tire, as opposed to like a Kush core being 250 grams. There's some models on the market that are way up at 300 grams now. So you don't have quite as much of a trade-off anymore, with our product. And then another thing you mentioned being like the fitting difficulty. So one of the traits that we have with our Pro insert is there's two different materials that are bonded together. It's like dual layered. And that dual density is like when we released it was our USP. No other product on the market had that. I think even like now, there's basically no other product that has that, or no like large, well-known product. The material we used on the top is energy sensitive. So when you like compress it with like low amounts of force, it's quite malleable, and that leads to like a really easy to fit insert. It also leads to an insert that doesn't resist the tire doing what it needs to do in order to give you traction. The knobs need to be able to conform to the things that you're riding over in order to like keep traction, keep the shape of the tire correct, etc. But as you apply energy, all the molecules that are like shaped kind of like hooks hook against each other and like create these long chains of very like resistant, like strain resistant, or like tensile resistant, like longer chains of molecules. So you get a stiffer piece of foam out of it when you add energy. So our Pro insert is like simultaneously the lightweight, non-existent product inside your wheel, and also something that is like a really, really protective, really stiff thing at the same time, depending on the use case, basically. Um, so I recommend you just give it another go and see what you think. We'll send you some of our Pro Race Edition inserts, the ones that have been raced to the top step of the podium in the downhill circuit multiple times this year, and see for yourself whether or not you feel the trade-offs are still too great for you. Depending on the type of biking you're doing, you may want to consider going from like downhill casing down to like an enduro carcass as opposed to keeping the super super thick carcass, because you're able to drop like 100 or so grams by doing that, and then adding the insert back in. You're basically going back to the same weight system, but you get the run flat capability, you get some of the damping qualities of the material, and you should net out with a more protective system because the insert is better than just a downhill tire is in terms of impact resistance. So yeah, give it a go. I myself run the race editions with downhill casing tires because my philosophy when I go for a bike ride is puncture ruins my day, even if it's easy to fix. And so I'd rather just not have one. I'd rather have the bike always feeling amazing. I'd rather be able to ride any line I choose to, even if it's a bad line. And I'd rather just always ensure that I get like a full day without any mechanicals. So I run that, and I'm only 72 kilos, and I'll do a 2,000 meter day, no problem. So I don't feel that 100 grams or 150 grams in your tires really makes that much of a difference to how much fun you can have.
Yeah, for sure. And one thing, you were talking about is like damping and support. And then like, as you're putting that tire in there, you're taking up some of the air volume in the tire. So you're essentially changing the spring rate. And I think, the feel of the full, yeah, go ahead. No?
Actually,
Yeah,
so
correct
that's
me
something
on that. Correct me on that.
I assumed when absolutely, yeah. So something I assumed when I first started making the product, and it's something I've seen pop up in other people's marketing. But when we actually did the test to find out, it was quite surprising. So and you can do this test pretty easily. You can do a similar test, a little bit more of a guessy test. If you put a pressure gauge on your valve, and you compress, like you push down on your tire, you put all your weight down on your tire, you'll note that the pressure doesn't go up basically at all. And the reason for this is the volume of air that you have inside like a 27 or 29 inch 2.4 inch mountain bike tire is quite large, and the contact patch that you have with the tire and the floor at any given time doesn't really exceed much more than like a couple of inches. And so the amount that you can physically compress your tire before you reach kind of that bottom out state isn't enough to compress all the molecules of air inside your tire and create a ramp up of pressure that is noticeable on like a graph. There's a few different like formulas that you can use to calculate the ramp up in pressure that you should expect to see, and they're really hard to like adapt to like a mountain bike wheel and tire and the various like intricacies that come into like the system when you're actually riding a bike. But you can plug in the numbers into like all of them. That I came across three when I was doing my research for this, and all three of them basically netted out as like you won't see any change. The two like lines that it plotted as a result of like this leverage ratio were near on identical, and so yeah, you don't actually, by reducing the air volume in the tire, you don't change that enough because it's not. I think it's to do with the like the piston in which you're compressing into the air volume is not great enough. Doesn't have a great enough surface area to enact enough change on the greater systems. Does that make sense? Very poorly explained it, but ultimately we set out with this. This is how this works in our mind, and I wanted like some cool graphs that would like prove this, and also a way of being like, if I was to increase the volume of the insert up this way or down this way, I would create this much change on the graph, and then I could like sell that as a thing. So I could be like, if you're finding you need more bottom out resistance, rather than adding weight, add volume, in that kind of way. But what I found was I couldn't make that change by adding inserts in there. And then there's another caveat in that inserts, the foam the inserts are made of, and this goes for all the products on the market, compress under like a 20 psi air chamber. So we've got an air chamber here in which we've got all the inserts on the market, we whack them all in, you pressurize it to 20 psi, and they all lose like a surprising amount of their volume, so they sort of shrink down. So if they're able to shrink down that much under 20 psi, and then you're suggesting that you compress your tire and that increases the air volume quicker, then that material must also have that ability to compress further as the pressure goes up, and so it would stay relative.
Fairly equal.
Yeah, it's not as straightforward as that claim.
Yeah.
But getting that information out to like the public in succinct and obvious ways, silly, so it's better just to let people debate about it. And just make sure that we know when we're designing the products that there is actually a reason for the way we design it.
Yeah, thanks for that clarification. A total assumption that makes sense in your head, but I guess when you actually test it, it doesn't exactly work out that way. But you guys have done the testing, so you would know. Definitely down to give them a try again. I've got nothing against it. I just haven't revisited it in like four years or so. So
things have refined a whole lot since that point. That'll go for all the brands out in the market, but we've never let off the gas with ours. So I think that giving it a second go is definitely a good idea.
Cool. Well, stoked for it, dude. I mean, is there anything else worth covering in Rimpact world? You guys got anything else up your sleeves that you're working on?
Nothing we can tell you about at the moment,
right on.
Other than things like e-bike versions of our chain damper, etc., and the upcoming TMD that we've already spoken about. So when I do have more things that I'm willing to share, then I'll hit you up.
Sounds good, man. Well, thanks for providing so much insight on these products. I'm sure the people listening definitely appreciate kind of going into the nuts and bolts of that stuff, and that's information I haven't really been privy to, or so it was really fun chatting with you, and it's clear you guys do your homework over there.
Thanks very much. I want to give a shout out to Dan Hicks. He's the engineer that worked on the chain damper with us and provided tons of help with the TMD and also with our tire inserts and things like the pressure increase that we're talking about. He's a fantastic engineer. He's the guy who designed the Privateer Gen 2 bike.
Okay.
And he's also now working for One Up doing some cool stuff there. So he's an absolute whiz, and he moonlights for us. So just want to give him a shout out for some of the super good work he's done.
Yeah, shout out Dan. Killer job, dude. You going riding this weekend?
Not this
Where's
weekend. I
Rimpact
gotta
located?
look after my toddler.
Uh,
We are in Bristol in the UK, so we are about 45 minutes from the steep South Welsh valleys. Risca is our like local stomping ground that we tend to go to test all this stuff. But we have things like Bike Park Wells, which more of your guys would know, and Dovey Bike Park, which is about 3 hours from us.
Sweet. What bike are you riding these days?
I'm on a Geometron G1.
Yeah, the new one, the latest and greatest.
Not the new one. I'm actually going to demo the Gearbox Pinion Smart Shift
Ooh.
version next month to hopefully pick one of those up. But I'm on the older version, which I've been on for like the last 4 years, which is pretty unheard of for me because I have access to like all these like industry discounts, and I could ride pretty much anything. And honest to God, that is the best bike going. Other than a few little changes I'd like to make, which the new G1 version 2 has already made for me. That bike's fantastic. So yeah, can't recommend
Yeah,
it enough. Hit
I,
hit up either Nikolai or John Armstrong.
yeah. Choose your poison. Um, what size? How tall are you, and what size are you riding for your
So I'm
G1?
179 centimeters, and I'm on
Yeah,
the large, which I think is like the longer model.
yeah.
It's got a 515 reach with 454 rear end, and I run it in like the
Yep.
170 mode. I
Okay.
find with like quite a decent amount of stack, it pulls the reach back just into kind of the range I like it, and keeps me very
Hmm.
centered on the bike. Paired with the EXT suspension, it's like unbelievably composed, and you can just switch off and push as hard as you like on it, and it kind of doesn't ever get um, into a position where like you've written a check it can't cash. It's always like able to just go harder. So um, it's sort of like a very safe but dangerous bike at exactly the same time.
Yeah, totally. I rode the same bike in the same size, so I know what you're talking about. um, well, sweet man. I think that's about it for today. Like I said, thanks for hopping on, and yeah, we'll have to do it again sometime. Thanks for all the info.
Not a problem at all. It's good chatting to you. Thanks.
All right, see ya.